Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next class in the Uranus series. So, Kristin and I are now talking about Uranus in the 8th house. As always, let's start by just connecting with the energy of that house. And then we'll apply Uranus there and look at some interesting charts. So, the 8th house corresponds to life experience in which the soul is encountering really the edge of its own psychological self-awareness. It really speaks to our deepest insecurities, our greatest psychological weakness and limitations. It points back to where essentially this human life is about an evolutionary process. And the evolutionary process means there's an ongoing movement towards greater realization of what we are. That ongoing movement towards greater realization means there is within the soul a quality of discontent, a quality of wanting more. Like there's a wiring towards there's more here, there's more to realize, there's more to experience. And so naturally in the 8th house, relative to just the reality of evolution, we're drawn into life experience, to osmose with that which we see as outside of ourselves, people, places, things, experiences, anything that really can happen in this human life. They become objects of greater realization. They're symbols of power that we see outside that we're actually wanting to awaken within, right? So we come into a relationship and we completely immerse. The idea of osmosis speaks to a process, and I know it's a scientific idea, but just psychologically, wherein the result of such osmosis is the organisms are no longer what they were prior to the osmosis. So we're fusing with and realizing and becoming something more from within. Like the soul itself being just this pure, like how do you define the soul other than desirousness? It's like, it's just the energy, it is desire itself. And I think the evolutionary journey is a matter of where is that desire energy being directed? It has to go somewhere because there's an ultimate reality to the soul of being one with its creator. And so it's like Jeffrey Wolfe describes the evolutionary process itself as the gradual exhaustion of all desires until the only remaining desire is the desire to reunite with source. So it's like the power, it's a profound amount of energy, the power of the soul. And for this desire energy to be directed towards anything says, this is why I'm here. Like this is the deeper, predominant psychological behind the scenes motivation for why I'm even having a time space earthly human experience. And we have to see it through, like the exhaustion and the moving through desires. It has to be met. It has to be completely honest. There has to be an actual experience within the soul itself before any soul can move on from it. Whether that means, it doesn't always mean that we get everything that we want, right? But it doesn't mean abstaining from everything that we want either. It has to be engaged. It's a full-on committed process. So what we're going to be doing here is looking into this archetype relative to Uranus. Any planet, any archetype manifesting within the 8th house speaks to this is where there's a significant focus of evolutionary experience. 8th house is marriage. 8th house is divorce. 8th house is the psychology of confrontation. And if we're soul-centered, which for every person, it doesn't have to be framed as soul-centered, but what that means is one who is centered in looking at themselves, being able to uncover what are the reactions that I'm having, what are the underlying psychological motivations, what's underneath what's going on here, right? That level of soul level orientation means in the confrontation, in the not getting what we want, or in being confronted, or in being confronted with experiences of loss or abuse or challenges that are hard, where we don't feel like we're accessing our power. And a very common 8th house experience is simply the even subtle psychological state of addiction where we're looping upon certain patterns of behavior over and over and over and over again, or repeating the same dynamics, but we don't know why. Why am I manifesting this? Why am I attracting this? Why am I doing this? Why am I stuck on this? Right? So we go from a more gross level identification with life experience, craving, aversion. This will make me feel better. And we can get in that whole victim-perpetrator loop, being the victim, being the perpetrator. These are just two sides of a coin, where if we're not going deeper into really looking at our own psychology, it's easy to just stay there and perpetuate a particular realm of earthly human experience. That's the whole suffering thing. That's like what we're doing, that's just the endless wheel of suffering. And there's a gem for all eighth house expressions of being able to look at oneself. The eighth house in part corresponds to the third eye, the idea of the third eye. And that third eye is where we penetrate, we concentrate. And if that direction is going within, because that third eye could also be used externally on any symbol of power or object of desire, or even to kind of get into another person's energetic field to get, and it can be used in all kinds of manipulative ways as well. Or we can be out of touch with that within ourselves. To direct it inward is always, in a sense, to retreat from the seeming immediacy of whatever object focus or concerns we have in our human life, and to go into, well, at an ultimate level, this whole life experience is an outpicturing of my inner soul reality. There's nothing that happens that isn't essentially relevant to my soul evolutionary growth, and thus we can really understand everything's relevant, and thus everything's ultimately beneficial. Not to use that in a way where like suffering is beneficial, but to understand if we can recognize everything, even where we're met with intense victimization and hurt and anger, as fundamentally at the core reflecting our own existing psychological limitations or edges in our own evolution, there's an opportunity for growth. When we begin orienting towards full self-responsibility and growth, it becomes more about what does it look like? What is the teaching here when I'm no longer depending upon the coming and the going, no longer concerned with gain or loss, but I'm looking entirely at where all things are pointing me back to myself. And the gem, the teaching of our evolutionary journey, is self-realization. It's coming more home to what we are, which we all do eventually. We all learn this eventually. So powerful stuff going on in the eighth house. Do not mess with it. Do not underrate it. It's an important house.
Yeah. There's this just listening to you, because it's definitely like living on the edge. I would say Uranus in the eighth is someone who needs to live on the edge in order to feel alive. It's somebody who's always pushing those limits. And I remember recently reading a story about this adventurer by the name of Johnny Strange. Did you ever hear about him?
Familiar name.
He's one of these guys that would like jump off mountains with a wingsuit on, right? Like a skydiving wingsuit. I mean, he died young in his early 20s, I believe, but it was always the next extreme adventure. I mean, he even knew, had a sense, and everybody around him, the jump that would lead to his death. And he was crying before he went, knowing. And so, but there's some
Did he
people.
die doing that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the wingsuit didn't open. Somebody filming it didn't open correctly or right away. And so what happened was it didn't open right away, and then he just started doing this, and there was no way to get back. But I don't know.
What was his name?
Johnny Strange, and from Malibu, California. And he, I don't have, I mean, he's born in December 26th, 1991. So I don't have, he's got Uranus on the North Node. I don't have, it's not, it feels like it must be in the eighth house. Again, we can't say for sure. He looks like a Scorpio guy if you see his pictures, but just you sharing this, it's, again, people who have Uranus in the eighth, it's an extreme energy. When they that's how they feel alive. And they really, I think, they can come to this world really wanting to be movers and shakers, and to be innovators, and to wake people up, or the shock value. And I mean, for this guy, it was like a thrill that you can imagine. If you get this thrill, you get this buzz, you get this charge when you're, skydiving in this wingsuit, like you're a bird, like an eagle. He does have Venus conjunct Pluto, I think, in Scorpio. then imagine when you're not doing that and you need that charge to feel alive. And everything is there's always going to be this something missing feeling. Always. He does have Jupiter conjunct the moon in Virgo. So there's this, again, we're getting off
Where's
subject.
Mars? It's off subject. Where's Mars?
Mars is in Sag, of course. But it's squaring the moon most likely. And so the moon in Virgo, there's always this sense of something missing, trying to fill the void. And so something that's so supercharging like that, it takes your mind off everything. You have to be totally present, obviously. And you cannot be thinking about anything. So anyway, it was a tragic death. But everybody in his life kind of just had this funny, weird, bad, hard feeling about this particular trip that happened, I believe, in the Alps in Switzerland, very, very past. In fact, that would be an interesting chart. I did run it recently, but a death chart overlapped to that chart.
Yeah.
Would have been a big one. But so anyway, because we don't have his birth time, we can't say for sure, but it's that kind of energy. And as soon as you read a story about a soul like that, you get it. You know what I'm talking about. And not knowing the limits, right? A lot of times with that strong Scorpio, people can go beyond that limit, and it's over. So not respecting those limits can cause the soul to come back again and again and again before they do.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say is the underlying evolutionary intention of Uranus in the 8th or Scorpio?
Oh, I mean, for sure, it's a classic signature for absolute innovation, individuation. I would say being able to objectify themselves, why they're doing something. Why am I like this? Why do I need this? Why am I so obsessively compulsed about needing to do this activity or that? I mean, and then again, you have to look at stages of evolution for people. We have some incredible chart examples today that are consensus individuated in spiritual state. That's which right. We'll talk about. We're covering the gamut. So, when that energy evolves, it can be someone who helps other people accelerate their own evolution, right? But I would say too, absolutely, especially for one of the examples I'm thinking of, I mean, people with this particular signature can want to be the first to do something, right? The pioneer, or like the inventor, or the mind behind something, because Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. And it's not so much that it's their idea so much, although it could happen that way. But that it's like land that's not been explored, I would say. So yeah, so I would, the evolutionary intention, though, I would think on a personal level is just honoring every nuance of the individual's unique way in the world, and but also objectifying how far, looking at your life and saying, okay, how far do I really go with this, right? When is enough?
Right, it's like that objective, or I mean, Uranus anywhere, the intention is about liberation. So here it's like we're liberating from the metaphor of
right.
And so we have, on the one level, we can have souls with the signature that are taking it, that are almost like obsessive about it, in that Uranian, like mad scientist kind of way.
Yeah.
They're in their own little world, obsessed with the symbols. This can be an obsession with magic symbols, obsession with sex, obsession with probing into the deeper realms of the subconscious. And we have within that, for some souls, there's a strong drive, and this drive, it's like you combine the impulse for liberation of Uranus and the impelling, irresistible force of evolution within the 8th house. It's this drive to break free out of any kind of superficiality, of living on the surface, of just taking for granted the comings and the goings. It's wanting to really get to the core. Yeah, I'm excited for today's example. There are just some really cool stories of this. The idea here is all of the game and the human drama of craving and aversion. There's an impulse with Uranus in the 8th house to step aside and actually observe one's psychologies. Wow, I'm really afraid of this. I'm really obsessed. I'm really attached to this. And instead of just playing it out, there's a calling to become a witness of it. And then what happens is the soul realizes all of these objects that come and go are actually just symbols of an essential quality of being within oneself. So there's an accelerated evolutionary process, an accelerated awakening that can occur for souls with this signature, like profoundly so, by way of actually stepping away from the seeming allure of the whole eighth house drama.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where these souls can actually find within themselves very deep, I'm not sure what the right word would be, like a deep occult quality to them, where they can peer into almost like the objective scientific matrix of the soul itself, to see other people, to see situations and the deeper psychological underpinnings going on, but to have a bird's eye view of it. It's like understanding karma from a higher mind perspective. So we can see all of the entanglements of the human experience and understanding how it's rooted in a greater soul evolutionary process. So these are souls that very, very often will come across or develop a psychic capacity to peer and to see the reality of a soul dynamic. And this is sort of seeing it where the past and the future both come in. Mm-hmm. Because when we operate on a Uranian level, we're not looking so much at a time process, like something happening in time. We're looking at the objective symbol of the soul itself and the core dynamics of the soul that continue to repeat and manifest within time, but they're sort of singular. So it's almost like, to quote a David Hoffmeister teaching, the difference of looking at a long piece of spaghetti versus turning that piece of spaghetti and just looking at that single point. Like in the present moment, that single point, the whole spaghetti is included in that line versus looking at that spaghetti in the timeline. So the entire soul reality can be seen in the present moment, which if you turn it 90 degrees, you'll see time moving backwards and forwards, but it's just the core blueprint of the soul's evolutionary journey. We can also say the soul's liberating from paranoia, fear of death, fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal. There can be subconscious memories of being betrayed, friends, lovers, people with whom there's strong emotional bonds, running away, abandoning them. And so there can be this underlying paranoia around trust. Can I really trust? Can I really open up? So there can be this absurdly irrational obsession, an attachment, or paranoia, or fear of opening up that happens with these souls. And the key is to be able to allow the emotional content, the fear, all that stuff to arise without grabbing it and associating it too much with story. Because we'll see that actually there's something old that's healing, and it's freeing us up to realize who we actually are.
I want to share something. It's unbelievable, when we get together with these sessions and teaching these things, it just seems, go for it. It just seems like the clients come and have these stories, have these symbols. I literally just did a reading for somebody this morning who has Uranus and Cancer in the 8th. And she was telling, and it's conjunct Jupiter, and it's squaring her Scorpio. See, it's in Cancer, right? So it's not squaring the Scorpio, but she does have a couple Scorpio planets, Saturn, Venus in the 11th. And she said, she was telling me about these ghosts that live in her house. I'm like, yeah, of course. She's got Uranus. And how cold it is, the difference between a spirit and a ghost. I mean, a ghost, the energy is going to be cold. When it's a spirit, you're going to feel quite warm in their presence. It's a different energy.
Yeah.
But, and how I wouldn't call her paranoid at all. Like, I believe her. I've been in houses when I was convinced that there was somebody in there, like a ghost that didn't want to leave, etc.
Sure.
So, but one thing she said to me, I thought was super interesting, because when you think about Cancer, you think about also how these triggers, if there's somebody in the house and you're alone, when she's not alone, she's fine. When she's alone, it feels altogether very different. She doesn't feel as protected, and she becomes I'm sure inside the little girl, right? Who's afraid to look under the bed. She's like, Kristin, I don't want to be a medium. And yet she's also had, different energies kind of come to her and glob onto her. It's the last thing I want. So you talk about a psychic sense. And so these people, a lot of people who have Uranus in the 8th, I mean, not in a consensus state, I would say they're not in touch with this, but they do, the energy field is so intense, and they become so attractive in that way to the other side that there is a powerful capacity, to do something with that. But you've got to be ready. You've got to want it, uh, and I think it's nerve wracking for people who have Uranus in the eighth emotionally. And especially in this case, I have a lot of compassion for that. So anyway, I just thought right on the heels of, I mean, what's the answer for that really?
Mm.
She's had plenty of people come in to try and do clearings. I'm like, look, if the ghosts don't want to leave, they're not going to leave. I don't care how many people try and clear it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't give an answer for this soul, but where my mind immediately goes is relative to the eighth house. Let's look at the fears.
Yeah.
What are the fears that are actually happening? Like, what's actually coming up here? There can be such a deep. That's the thing with the eighth house. So we don't usually know any eighth house signature. We don't usually know why we feel the way that we feel. And with Uranus, there's just so much that's suppressed. There's so much content that's suppressed. So being able to see all of this, and this is a very helpful way of working, and this is a hard thing to gauge for most souls, but it's more true. Uranus in the eighth house is like the death card in the tarot. And if we can see everything, even scary things, as just this archetypal symbol reflecting what's happening in our interior consciousness and not take it literally, there's a sort of, again, Uranus is that fool, right? There's a sort of freedom. Here it's like the freedom to walk without a story in the middle of the underworld.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of dead people here. Yeah. And again, I'm not one to speak about this. I'm sure there are some dead people around, and they're all over the place as far as I'm concerned, but I'm not as sensitive to them. I actually had an experience. I mean, I've had several, but there was one particularly potent time in my life where there was a presence in this house I was renting, like, over 10 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago. And it was just so palpable. I can feel it in the room where I was living, and it would come up in my dreams, and it was not happy, and I tried everything. And it wasn't like, it wasn't of the light, right? It wasn't up to good. And I tried all the incantations, all the symbols, all that, right? And eventually it got to a point, now that I'm telling the story, and this has happened several times, so I don't remember if this, we hired someone to come in eventually and do this clearing, and maybe that was it, but there have been other instances. I remember once where I would go to sleep, and then it's following me, and I'm like I'm throwing out all of the tools, right? Even Jesus, right? Just everything, putting it out there, and nothing worked. And what is the intention? It's to induce within me a feeling of helplessness. Total, I am victimized by power forces, eighth house, greater than what I can control. Like, that's a very scary place. And thus, in that very place, only through feeling totally powerless did I have this spontaneous realization to simply give my concentration to the truth of my invulnerability in my connection to God. Like, everything else that I tried to do didn't work. And then the only option left for me was to actually just go to, not an idea or God, not a tool, not some chant, not calling for something, but to actually claim my unity with God, my connection, and thus my invulnerability. And it was like a vibrational power. And I remember one night where I did that. I was not going to be afraid. I got out of my bed, stood up, prayed, did that, affirmed who I am, affirmed what's true, went back to bed, and I had the most beautiful, light-filled dreams following that. So I'm combining different experiences, but that's a lesson. That's something that I've learned through encountering these things. Then we can always look at our victimization or where we feel powerless and just recognize, okay, that is where the teaching is. That's where the healing wants to happen here.
Yeah.
One more thing to say, with Uranus in the eighth, it's liberating from death as well. Because death can feel very, very literal and very, very scary, and there can be memories of being killed. And a lot of this is like the typical, the astrologer getting hung, the magician, the witch being hung at this. I mean, Uranus in the eighth is like also Uranus-Pluto people, the Uranus-Pluto and Virgo generation is like classic for, you put that in the eighth house, and it's like, yeah, How many times were you killed for, being spiritual or being magical or whatever? And so there can be that intense paranoia and sense of something's going to end. My life is going to end. I'm not, just a fundamental sense of unsafety. Jeff Green actually points out I was reading the Uranus in the 8th house section, that the deeper vulnerability within the 8th house is actually connected to the polarity of the 2nd house, which wants to survive. It's like,
Yeah,
I don't want to die.
Right.
Right. And so then to realize that from the point of view of the soul, there is no death. Right? It's stepping back and becoming an observer of oneself as a soul and seeing that there's a continuity. And Jeff Green teaches that the Uranus function speaks to long-term memory. And as we awaken, we access that. And we, souls that are more soul identified, their memory of self isn't limited to their human self. It's limited to their scope of soul experience, which is quite infinite actually. And that's the realm of soul memory. You can access it at that level of consciousness, and it goes really far back, and it can even go forward. So liberating from death and realizing I as a soul do not die. Mm-hmm. Right. And there's a profound power in that awakening.
I love that. That was perfect. I mean, so it's an immutable consciousness, right? It can never die. It just changes form. And just remembering that, right. What is the fear? That's a great question. All right. Before we go into our first example, I wanted you to know I snuck a peek a bit ago, and back to Johnny Strange. Check this out.
Yes, thank you, because I'm so fascinated by this.
Pluto, transiting Pluto, ready? Exactly conjunct his Uranus.
There we go.
I mean, there was other things going on. Mars was in Virgo on that day as well. And I talked to you about that Jupiter moon conjunction. But Pluto right there within minutes of an exact conjunction. So obviously Pluto moves slowly, but it's, leading up to that leap.
Wow.
There's a lot of trepidation. It was fate. It was fated to happen. It was going to happen. He couldn't control himself. It was like this obsession compulsion.
It reminds me of that story with Alex, forgot his last name, from who climbed El Capitan.
Oh yeah, Alex.
There's that one trip where he felt uneasy about it.
Yeah, and he didn't go.
And he had all the camera people with him, and he was going to do this big climb, but he aborted it.
Yeah.
And he's a different soul. He's a different example of someone that was actually working through that. Like, he was not going to kill himself.
This time, like, he had done it plenty of times. He had not paid attention to the signs. He even started climbing that mountain.
He had a Virgo thing going on, Virgo moon too, right?
Yeah. He had some strong Virgo. I can't remember exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. You ready to start our examples?
Let's do it.
Okay.
You start. We'll start with the first one here.
Okay.
Okay. Can you see it?
No. There we go. Okay, that's
Are we full screen?
We're full screen now. We've got the picture of Pluto, lovely Pluto. And
why did we pick this image?
There's a heart on it. No, because this is going to be saved for this particular image is saved for our last example. But our first example is Jeffrey Wolfe Green, who brought evolutionary astrology to this planet. And you know what? I wanted to say that he's got Uranus in the 8th house, of course, it's retrograde. And Uranus connects to astrology, connects to alternative studies and astrology in particular, and it's in the house of the soul. And what did he bring? Evolutionary astrology, which is astrology for the soul. And it's in Gemini. He was a disseminator of information through his books and his teachings. He used his voice, his words to reach people about the soul journey and how you can recover your own true fingerprint. That's Pluto, the fingerprint. No two are alike. And so anyway, I wanted to share, I meant to say this when we met to do the introductory webinar for our new Pluto class series that we started, the Jeffrey Wolfe Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers. And what I failed to mention in that brief bit was, he was studying Dane Rudhyar in his 20s, and nobody was talking about Pluto. Nobody. And when he had this dream, and Yukastroar came to him in this dream with this Pluto material, with the book, and literally was turning page after page after page. It was then that this material was dropped into his consciousness. So the piece that I wanted to emphasize is nobody was talking about Pluto, zero, nobody. It just came into him suddenly. That's Uranus. And Yukastroar wasn't even talking. He was just turning pages in the book. This is what it will look like, Gemini. And let him know, I don't know how long the dream took, or anything like that, but that's Uranus too. It's something that happens so fast. It's electric. It's just transferred, just boom, suddenly. It's like a lightning bolt. And that's how that happened. And so it was great, groundbreaking. And even though the material is ancient, I'm sure, timeless, it's timeless, but it was groundbreaking. I mean, everybody thought, what the heck is this? It took some people some time to grab a hold of it. But that is so Uranian, waking people up with something really wild and new frontier, right? Mm-hmm. But, and I will add again, not but, and I will add again that it really was the material and the teachings. I mean, he would travel once a month all over the world for many years, and people would show up and packed house. And he used to claim that, it was not the man, it was the material. It was the teachings that they were so drawn to. Pluto, the evolutionary journey of the soul. Pluto, 8th house ruler. Uranus. It's so literal. That's what I love about EA. It is so literal. I mean, we don't take charts and just pick out one symbol, but it is so literal. Anyway, the ruler, obviously, of Uranus in Gemini is Mercury in Scorpio, retrograde. And
is it retrograde?
Oh, no, it's not retrograde. Sorry, Venus is retrograde. I think it's actually stationary direct. If you go one day before that, I'm pretty sure Mercury was retrograde, but he does have a stationary retrograde or stationary direct Mercury. I'm almost positive. But anyway, Mercury in the first house of new beginnings, in Scorpio here with Venus and Jupiter in the new phase. So anyway, I love that example here. And what about you, Ari? What do you can offer, I'm sure, some pearls here.
Sure. Well, just looking at that in conjunct with Mercury, the ruler of that Uranus, it's like receiving this content. And the interface between Mercury and Gemini with Uranus is we're not able to translate into specific articulate language the higher mind content, right? So it's Uranus and Gemini in the 8th house, which is objective knowledge and context and information. It's gathering, it's putting together greater context to organize a more holistic understanding of reality that pertains to the underlying fabric of this human incarnation. So it's working with the linear mind, but at a much higher level. That's the stress here. How do you translate that? What words do you give it? Right. So Gemini, Uranus, 8th house it's a totally impersonal, objective, higher level download of ideas and concepts that's kind of bypassing the linear mind and just being received. Now that needs to be then translated into articulate words that he is expressing and putting out there. It's that classic in conjunct. Just do it. It's like one step at a time.
I remembered something. I don't remember if I shared this in the introductory video, but he said that he learned this work when someone would ask him a question about Pluto, the evolutionary journey of the soul, or whatever it is about the material, he would just start talking, and he wasn't even thinking, and he would learn while he would respond to someone. It was in him, and someone would ask a question, and it literally just came out of him that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can also see that in Jupiter and Scorpio in the 12th. He's just a receiver of this spiritual information in that new phase with Mercury. You're going to articulate it and process it and assimilate it in the mind and give it perspective and context and word just by moving with it, translating it.
Another thing I love about Scorpio in this way, with the Gemini, Mercury, Uranus combination, anyone who's read his books, he does not waste words.
Right.
You could read a sentence 10 times and sit and think about that sentence for, a year. I think it's just there's no fluff, there's no extra stuff. It's just Scorpio bottom line. Get to the center of it, get to the root of it. No bullshit, excuse my French, but that's what it is. No BS, cut to the quick. And that's the nature of how he taught. He didn't dance around things. He didn't have time for it. He wouldn't entertain it ever.
Beautiful point.
So
It's so true in his teachings, and it's almost like Gemini in the eighth itself in general is like a mantra, right? Like word vibrations that get to the geometric essential vibratory essence of things. And then Uranus, it's the function here is liberating the mind from any kind of subjective thinking, liberating the mind from any fluff, any opinion, any fad, it's the words want to express the essential intelligence of the reality of the soul itself. And it's so true what you said. When I first began reading the Pluto book, I mean, this was like, I was in my early 20s. It was so dense. I would put it down. I discovered it. It was life-changing. It was an essential turning point in my life to find it. But then I would go months at a time between looking at it, because what I would encounter had such a essential depth and pointing to it that I would have to give it a lot of time for that to work itself into my existing understanding, kind of build itself within my mind. Yeah, not wasting words. And that's at Uranus as well, liberating from any kind of superficiality. The intention here was to use the mind in a way that reflects the essential intelligence of the soul's evolutionary journey, articulating that and expressing that clearly. And anything that's added to that would only take away from the clarity of the teaching.
You know what it reminds me of too? When I think of Uranus, I think of a photographer taking a picture and the flash going off. Like when you walk into a room and you see something and everything comes into you like a flash, you're not in this mental place. You're not in this left brain place. On the one hand, it is a holistic experience when you look at a picture, but it comes into you in a different way, and it blasts into you in a way. So sometimes the words and how he puts them together would create sort of a shock or a blast or a jolt, because it catches you, because it's like so intense. And you're like, oh my gosh, I need to take a breath for a second. I can totally relate to what he just, whatever it might have been that you're reading. And I mean, I know when I picked up the Pluto book too, I really, it was so deep and so total that I wasn't ready. And then I went to the school and heard him teach, or he was teaching the school. So I was able to experience, him in that regard. And he would teach in a very compassionate, sensitive, but intense way. And it would allow the material to come in to me where I was, more receptive, I think, to it. And then I went back to the Pluto book and I was able to take it in. But at first it was like, whoa, this is intense. And it was hard for me to integrate it deeply at the level that is needed. I'm just somebody that is better with material when I'm hearing it and I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it from somebody. So you have to know how you learn best in order to take in all the layers, the beautiful layers, the depth and the layers of evolutionary astrology, for sure.
Beautiful. Anything else to add to this?
I think that's good for now.
Marilyn Monroe. I really enjoyed getting to learn about this soul. It's kind of been in my periphery for a long time. I have an immense amount of interest and respect for this soul, having learned more about her. So she has Uranus in Pisces in the 8th house. We have a pretty strong water trine here. Saturn in Scorpio in the 4th. So water signs, water houses. And then we have all of that Cancer in the 12th. Not so much north of Pluto, but whatever. They're all archetypally in a trine energetic with each other. This is a soul that didn't receive good upbringing from her. So there is father not there, not interested, abandoned her mother. Her mother had a lot of emotional health issues and that she lived in many different homes, and at a certain point was put completely in other people's homes. So she didn't have a very solid and stable upbringing from her parents, from her mother in particular. And she tried to find her father, who was not interested in meeting her, and this was before she was famous. So there was a very strong desire within the soul to be loved, to be wanted. We can say that was one of the core, deeper psychological needs of this soul, like a deeper feeling of belonging. And she married when she was really young, like 19 or something really young like that. And it was pretty conventional. And as she grew, she started to get recognized and had a few gigs, but really quickly grew into a space of fame. And this helped her to come to realize that she had a soul destiny and she didn't want to feel limited. So this is sort of the beginning of this Uranus in Pisces in the 8th house. And it's ruled by Neptune in Leo in the first. I have a sense of special destiny, something great, something big. She did live a life where she became an icon, but an icon for what, right? Sexual icon. Pisces in the 8th house. The world was able to project all of their fantasies and illusions and ideas of sexuality and to kind of meet it and work it out through her. And this met this piece in her that wanted really to be seen, to be loved, to be special, to be someone. I can really see that in that North Node in Cancer in the 12th. Fundamentally, it's like there's a spiritual yearning for this soul to know herself, really to know home on a deep level of absolute love and safety and security, which really isn't of this world. And I think that's a part of the greater existential struggle. But even at Neptune and Leo in the first, it's like, I have to be special. I have to be someone. And then one of the greatest stresses is no one really sees me. I'm just a projection in everyone's mind. There's that famous scene where she's in this movie and the wind tunnel underneath the New York City sidewalk was blowing her skirt up. Oh, look at my skirt is being blown up. Look at me. Yeah. And she hated it. She had this strong desire, and earlier in her career, they rejected more serious roles. She wasn't really supported by the industry to do. They wanted more ditzy comedy type roles with her, but she wanted something more deep. And she got into a relationship with Joe DiMaggio, who was a baseball player, very straight, very sad. He didn't like all the glamour and the fame in show business. And eventually, once she got really big, they separated. It just, the lifestyle wasn't compatible, but they had a lot of love and respect for each other. And there's something with Uranus in the 8th house that I want to speak to in general, which is we think of the idea of soulmate often, right? As like, two souls that are able to both grow as a soul together and kind of walk on this path of self-realization. But when we understand this archetype with Uranus in the 8th house, it's about soul level bonding as friends. It's, I am able to fully companion you and see that your journey is whole. You're your own individual. You are your own full sovereign soul. And I respect you. I don't need to extract something or hold you back from your sovereignty, right? So there can be these commitments based on a deep soul level of respect and friendship. And there's almost like a deep craving sometimes with Uranus in the 8th house for that, where the deeper essence of what we are can be met without getting stuck in all that kind of drama and stuff. But she had a need, and this is that object of power, she had a need to connect with her own power, her own vitality, her own capacities. So there was a very strong promiscuity, very strong attraction to symbols of power that were greater than life itself, right? Being attracted to famous, powerful men and being a symbol of a very powerful, sexualized woman, at the same time wanting to liberate from that, feeling like it was all just a facade. None of it was real. None of it was who she was. And that Mars balsamic to Uranus as well. We can then again see that process with all that sexual energy both being projected on her from men, but then how she was sort of seeking a relationship to that masculine, and how that can easily take the course of ultimately her demise was through prescription drugs, and she fell into a very deep depression at a certain point, but also through sexuality. So it's just very, and that Mars also is in conjunct to Neptune, which rules that Mars. Again, it's like there's a lot of vital life force energy there, and it's wanting God, it's wanting meaning, it's wanting something that is truly valuable. And I think such a big part of her soul journey was seeking for that meaning and falling short of it time and time and time again. And of course, that Saturn and Scorpio in the fourth, fundamentally, there's with that North Node in Cancer as well with Pluto, the soul wants to experience what it's like to live in a state of deep emotional safety, to access the depth of who she is on a much deeper level beyond all superficiality, and issues around security and healthy attachments, and all of these things are such a big part of the soul journey. Now, one more thing I'll share. There's a point in her career where she wanted to go deeper as an actress. She wanted a more serious role. She was rejecting all of this. So she actually got to a point where she started taking acting classes, and she did this thing called method acting, where you really, I don't know much about it, but what I learned of it is it's psychologically very deep. You almost take on the role of the person you're acting. You become it. You find it within yourself. It's cathartic. It's deep. It's actually even scary, right? It's a very emotionally deep way of approaching a role in an acting career. And that took her very deep. And she was very interested in psychology. There's a quote, and I'll pull it up after I do the screen share, something about so-and-so trying to get her into religion. And she said, and I was trying to get them into Freud. She was interested in psychology. And I think these are facets of her own soul and the larger destiny of her own soul of continuing to want to look at who am I? This is an individuated state soul. I'm not entirely clear in terms of where to place her. She, on one level, broke the status quo in terms of sexuality, and also beyond that, the role of a woman and the level of power and authority that a woman could have, because also at a certain point, she would no longer take roles that she couldn't have directive power over. She let go. She was fed up with being a slave to the industry and playing these roles that objectified her. So she got to a point where she said, I'll do this, but I need creative and sovereign power over the directorship. I'm not going to just do something because I'm signing a contract to do it. I need to have that control and that power. I mean, this soul is on this ongoing journey to really realize her immense power, layer after layer after layer, not wanting to stop until she realizes who she is. So I had to see this momentum in her own soul for deep realization. Yeah, and so she got depressed. There got a point where she got into a relationship with Henry, who wrote The Death of the Salesman.
Oh, I forget, but
I think it was that guy. I might be wrong, but Henry something. I think Henry. She had a miscarriage, and she began to worry. Here's a paranoia that all of her promiscuity has resulted in her not being able to have a child, which we know is not true.
Right.
And so she became paranoid and began to exhibit many of the emotional and depressive states that her mother had. And she, of course, was put on prescription. And back then you take what you were prescribed. I don't know what she was prescribed, but God, you know how it was back then.
Oh my goodness, I can't even imagine.
People were prescribed class 1, class 2 drugs. I mean, for God's sakes. So it only took her down and down and down and down. Things just got worse and worse and worse. And she died of an overdose. But I think there is just, that phase in her life journey where I think it ended at 36 years old was her facing another threshold of emptiness and meaninglessness. And just to look at it for a moment, the fear, because I was wrong, I was bad, right? I did something bad with my sexuality. Saturn and Scorpio in the 4th house, like a feminine shame. And all that deeper Judeo-Christian spiritual stuff around Pisces in the 8th house. which really that signature can easily be profound promiscuity just as much as total chastity, right?
Yeah.
You don't even know what sex means. You never felt a
Yeah.
feeling of arousal ever, because how would I feel arousal? How would I ever want something like that? It can be both. And there can be a lot of confusion around sexuality and what's a okay expression, what's a healthy expression of sexuality, what's healthy discernment, what's healthy boundaries. There can be a lot of deep spiritual confusion, and ultimately a deep learning and a lot of forgiveness when we understand that in the
Uh,
sexual impulse there's a deeper yearning, and that you're okay, it wasn't wrong, it wasn't bad, but what am I looking for? How can we learn from that? What is it I'm really wanting? So I really feel like she was on the threshold potentially of another layer. You know, she was 36, 20, 30, 40, 50. She died in 1962-ish. Man, imagine if she was around just a little bit longer, like once the Beatles released a few more albums. Like, so much changed on the planet,
that's so true.
right? I have so much curiosity for this soul. She's like, I must have known her, or one of her, as I was learning about her, I was like, oh my God, I love you and appreciate. I just like one of those experiences where it's like there must be some kind of moment where I've known this soul. It's deep fascination and interest. And what's fascinating too is Uranus is often that icon, right? Social contagion. You bring forward these souls that these souls will bring forward this evolutionary process that then happens all over the world. Like Elvis, good example of Uranus in Aries in the fifth house, the sexual magnetism, creative performance. And here, this symbol of sexuality, she really liberated and opened something up huge in this world. But it's until today, when I was learning about her, I did not know anything about her. So most people, when they think of Marilyn Monroe, they're going to think of the symbols of sexuality and ditziness and Hollywood or whatever. So it's just interesting to know that and to really see what was really going on underneath the surface.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, this is the only thing I'll say. I definitely feel like she carried a deep guilt for the sexuality piece, because it wasn't, you know, it was just wasn't acceptable, and certain things were not acceptable, I would say. But she's every man's fantasy, and
Mm-hmm.
but that maybe she felt, I don't deserve to be a mother, like you said, because of that, and all of
Right.
whatever she had taken into her womb along those trails, um, and so with the ruler of that Saturn in the sixth, most south node in Capricorn ruled by that Saturn, excuse me.
Shame.
It's just there's that shame, and there's I don't deserve this, and I deserve pain and punishment
Mm-hmm.
because of
Good
what I've
point.
done. It's the whole sadomasochistic thing
Yeah.
that places Virgo, but also this
Point.
is life for her to be mothering herself, with Saturn and Scorpio in the fourth trining the North Node, trining Vesta. And through nurturing herself, she can heal herself. She can, she got none of that nurturing really, especially from a man, but their father not around. So, yeah, there's a lot of inner stuff to work out. And
Yeah.
she learned, with a Leo rising and Neptune in Leo, which is the ruler of the Uranus of Pisces in the eighth. She learned that no matter how many compliments, no matter how many men she slept with or what have you, or ood and odd, that that none of that was going to make her feel whole. Nothing ever would have, out there, bottomless pit out there,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so hopefully at the end of her life she would have, well, with the overdose, obviously she wasn't there. She's going to have to probably pick up where she left off, and at that intersection make other choices.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that nodal axis and just Cancer in the 12th. It's ultimately saying that there's a calling for forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that she's loved.
Yeah.
It's like the
That,
deepest.
no, we're all human. We all do things that we might have done different.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'll have a chance to make new choices another time.
So let's quickly speak about this guy.
Very
Very
quickly.
different kind of example, but there's some sort of quote where he bragged that he was um, famous for having lots of friends, lots of wealthy friends. He made billions kind of working and managing or doing stuff with other people's money. And of course, Uranus, eighth house itself being shared resources, but there's an underlying need to extract from other people what he perceives he lacks in himself. And speaking to Cancer, fundamentally speaks to his own inner feminine, right? His relationship to his own need for home, security, love, connection in a completely distorted way. This is a soul that is clearly not of the light, that had for many years abused many young women and ran a sex trafficking operation. And just to speak to the symbols, this is an example of the dark side of the eighth house and Uranus, total sociopathic, right? Detached from human emotion, Uranus in Cancer. The ability to hurt other people, to abuse them, to use them, to manipulate them, to psychologically manipulate them, to sexually manipulate them, and to remain completely cold and detached, and just think in terms of what am I getting and extracting. So like to me, Uranus in the eighth house also speaks to sort of the inhumane scientific experiments, quote unquote scientific experiments that the Nazis did. In fact, didn't Hitler have Uranus in the eighth, as I'm thinking about it?
So I think you're right.
No, he had Neptune, Pluto in the eighth.
Oh, Neptune, Pluto,
Yeah.
right.
But same idea, right? So the ability to go into the darkest, most evil places, but in the name of science, right? Or the darkest, most evil places and just be completely untouched, be completely dissociated, right? Have no humanity in that. It's ruled by his moon in Aries in the fourth house, which is a total narcissistic orientation. I'm entitled to express my emotional whims in the moment, whether it's raping someone, abusing them, taking advantage of them. I should, before I started talking about Jeffrey Epstein, I should have said trigger warning, because obviously I'm bringing forth content. So if you're sensitive, please know we're speaking about this kind of content. Yeah, so it's just worthwhile speaking to this, the nature of this signature as it can manifest in a darker way. Let me just tune in because there's another piece that I want to speak to here. We have the idea of Uranus being friends, right? You can have communities of people that you're a part of. We have facets of society with Uranus, right? It can be your country club, your political party. It can be you and your wealthy people. And so in this situation, we have a whole association of people that were circulating around what he did.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a part of the whole scandal and it took so long for him to actually be indicted because we had a lot of wealthy people with a lot of power and prestige who didn't want to be outed. So he was involved, sharing energy, sharing resource dependencies. That's the entanglement of the eighth house. It's like we become totally entangled in others. Well, he can be convicted because if he's convicted, then I'm going to be convicted.
Right.
So there are all these, and this is Uranus in the eighth house conspiracy.
Yeah.
Right? All these people keeping a secret, suppressing all of this content, and it's the suppression of the feminine. What this is not just what Jeffrey did. It speaks to a larger global issue that exists everywhere. And that people with wealth and status and power that are taking part of that have been suppressing so that they're not going to get in trouble. So they can remain entitled to do whatever they want and take advantage of others. So just a good example in understanding those pieces. Do you want to add anything to that?
Oh, well, just that there was, I know that do we know for sure how he died in jail? How he's hung? Did someone?
It's most likely he was killed.
Yeah.
Right, because if he would have testified probably and names would have come out, things like that.
Right.
That's my guess, but we don't know.
Well, he was in for life, so.
Yeah.
All right. No, we can move on. I'm good.
All right, this next chart is yours.
Can
we clarify that we don't have the birth time and just tell your rationale for why you chose this one?
I will do that. I will do that for sure. Okay, so this is the chart of Alan Stern, who is a planetary scientist, and he was the lead. What do they call him? Investigator. It's kind of a funny name for a space mission, but for the Pluto mission that. And it took 9 years to reach Pluto, to get photographs of Pluto, and that occurred in 2015, but he was the lead guy in this space mission and from NASA. And I love this picture because he's 6 years old, and there he is with his little microscope, already wanting to be a scientist. But I was thinking about this because just recently I watched the documentary, and if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend. There's a few different places you can go to YouTube and watch it, and just the whole thing. What happened is, as soon as the space mission, as soon as the launch happened, they had to just wait around for 9 years, right? It's like they put this little satellite on a what do you call it, on hibernation, until it gets close to Pluto, and then they like have to wake it up in a sense. And so it was really touch and go, even because they lost connection with the satellite right before it was about to cross over Pluto, and then were able to reconfigure things. They had a backup plan, and I think they had 4 hours to spare, and everything, connected again. And they got these beautiful images of Pluto, which we have at the beginning of the slide at the beginning of this meeting here today. But I don't have a birth time, so I just put the sun at 29:59, but he definitely could be a Sag as well. But look at that. I mean, Uranus is the planet that connects to space, and it's squaring his nodes with Mars in Scorpio on the North Node. And I wanted to read, see something here. It was an article in Science Magazine, but it says New Horizons, which is the name of the mission, is closing in on Pluto, once thought to be the last of the planets and a lonely outpost on the solar system's edge. Discovered in 1930, Pluto has remained something of a cipher despite the best efforts of telescopes in space and on the ground. Its changing atmosphere and variegated surface remain mysterious, and even its size is not precisely known. So on July 14th, 2015, New Horizons would zoom past it. And they were joking in this article a little bit because Alan Stern is like, he's short. I don't even know how little he is, but he looks, I don't know, about maybe 5'5". I mean, something not too big of a man. And they were commenting that this, the satellite is literally about the same size as he is. And it's amazing to think that something so small would have survived something like this. You know what I mean? It's just crazy. But I just love, I love the documentary. I love how it was even touch and go till the very end. You think about Uranus squaring the nodes. You're just a nervous wreck, something that you've spent 9+ years of your life dedicating to this mission. And he also talks about, Pluto's like the wild, wild west. It's like this it's all new territory. Like I was talking about before, it's just wanting to be the first to really discover something. And even though we don't have a birth time here, there's a prominent Uranus Scorpio signature with Uranus squaring the nodes. And there's been a lot of stops and starts in his life for sure. But so this is, this is a wonderful chart linked to that discovery. And I wanted to say too, there was a major transit that occurred on that at that point in time as well. I want to get that. Can you have any comments on the chart where I can try and get this?
Well, just Mars squaring Uranus in general. Within him, there would be this underlying soul motive to venture out where no one has gone before.
Yeah.
And this is the thing to understand about when you combine Mars and Scorpio and Uranus, it's like the best ingredients for you have no choice, but you got to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the destiny of your own soul.
Yeah, it's a fated life for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he has, I feel like he's definitely been a pilot and flown different kinds of aircrafts in other lifetimes. I mean, he's got aviator all over this, and he has a big history in this life, but and not made it, right? You can see that with Uranus squaring Mars, Uranus squaring the nodes.
Right. Yeah. A lot of failed missions. Yeah.
A lot of failed missions, or being a pilot and having that happen. So,
or even the dynamic of, like, again, typical Uranus, Mars, Scorpio, Leo. It's like you have some kind of innovation or scientific discovery, and then, it's burned or suppressed.
Yeah.
So many scientists that have you know, done great things, deep within their soul, there's some sort of memory of, you know, needing to move through the obstacles or the limitations of mainstream thinking.
Well, yeah, what I wanted to share, because I'm really excited. I actually did find the date. I'm big on transits because they just reveal timing of everything. And Saturn was exactly conjunct his sun when the mission completed. Saturn's the archetype
Wow.
of time, right? So if his south node is in Taurus and the ruler is Venus, Saturn rules Venus, and it was conjunct his sun. And that was his, part of his life purpose. So when you think of your purpose, and when you're, 85 or whatever, and you look back on your life and you say, what was my legacy? How did I help the world? Really, what am I most proud of? I mean, this is a big one. So a big part of it, he's done a lot of great things with space and his missions, etc. But I mean, there's been many, I don't know, something like, I want to say 17 or more missions of various kinds that he's been a part of. So anyway, Saturn will tell us, when we're doing our work, it can be like a harvest. It can be a time when you become recognized for something. Saturn's not always a really bad, hard thing. And he was recognized finally, and he bailed out of different projects because he wasn't seeing eye to eye at different times in his life. It didn't become popular because he wasn't agreeing on how much money was spent on this mission or that. He thought it was a waste. I mean, we need more money here for science to move it forward. So, he definitely was somebody that was not, he would speak his piece for sure, and he would bail if he wasn't, in agreement with something. So I really think this was an important mission for him. And, I'm sure he's doing something else now that I'm not aware of. People with a chart like this are not going to stop at that point in time. They're going to keep going and going.
He's still around, right? He's still here.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because
that image again.
First flyby of Pluto. Look at that heart on there. I just love it so much. And it's so perfect for the work that we're doing. It's heart opening for sure. Yeah, look at that. Wow.
Like it's beating.
I mean, they were just, all the scientists that were involved in this were just blown away with the images that they were able to get. So thanks to technology, Uranus.
Super cool.
All right.
Any final thoughts on Uranus in the 8th?
Well, I one thing we haven't said, I don't think, is that it's really an archetype for a lifetime. It's like there's some kind of catalyst in the life, right? It's fast, it's speedy, it's Uranian in terms of maybe the soul just can't get onto something fast enough. That can, all the examples we're talking about were all people that took their life to total extremes, limit pushers, really riding the edge of life and death. That's just part of the nature of the beast with that signature. And that's what a soul would have chosen in this life. So if you have that, you know what I'm talking about.
Or if Uranus is transiting through your 8th house as well. Powerful time.
It is.
All right.
All right. Well, we'll be back in a month or so to talk about Sag or the 9th house. Uranus and Sag are the 9th house.